Good afternoon. This is Bob Corry. I'm the moderator for the Brimfield Living History program. Today we have a very special guest, Helen Morris. She's 100 years old, and we're going to be interviewing her regarding her life, her ancestors' life in this area and their contributions, and some other really interesting topics that I think most people would find fascinating. Helen, would you introduce yourself?
I'm Helen Morris, and lived in Brimfield since retirement, and well, I don't know that there's anything special about me to say, but being 100 has been an exciting time, and I don't know what else I could say particularly. The one thing that I have done that had most fun doing and really enjoyed the most was when I worked at Hitchcock Academy. I was on the committee for renovating and organizing the room which they set aside as a memorial room for Samuel Hitchcock. And I did that for several years with a very interesting group of people on the committee. And other than that, I've just lived a very quiet, ordinary life, I would say.
Okay, one thing that I think our viewers would really enjoy is looking back over your life. Why do you think you've lived 100 years? What is it that you've done? What would your advice be to people on living a long, healthy life?
I would say probably the way that everyone does today, to watch your exercise and watch what you eat so that you're healthy. And to me, one of the most important things for me was I hated to get old and not be able to think clearly. And therefore, I really have made an effort to read books that are worthwhile. I've made an effort also to do jigsaw puzzles, not as much jigsaw puzzles, but crossword puzzles. And I've been interested in learning new things. So I've done things like a few of the great books courses that there was one on art and one on music, and then a few of the scientific ones. And I guess that's what I've enjoyed the most, doing a little research and really trying to keep my mind as active as I can.
Okay, I think that's outstanding recommendations. I'm going to read something I pulled off the internet about people that were born the same time as Helen and what life was like at that point in American history. The average life expectancy for men was 47 years. Fuel for cars was only sold in drugstores. Only 14% of the homes had a bathtub. The maximum speed limit in most cities was 10 miles an hour. The average U.S. wage in 1910, a few years before she was born, was 22 cents an hour. And the average U.S. worker made between $200 and $400 per year. A dentist could make $2,500. A veterinarian could make between $1,500 and $4,000 per year, and a mechanical engineer could make about $5,000 per year. Now, I'm gonna save the next one for a question that I'm gonna ask her, but most women only wash their hair once a month. Back then, they used borax or egg yolks for a shampoo. That Canada had passed a law that prohibited poor people from entering that country for any reason. The population of Las Vegas, Nevada was 30, and only 6% of Americans had graduated from high school. Now, the next one is very interesting. It says that more than 95% of all births took place at home. Helen, where were you born?
I was born in Palmer Hospital, and it was not the one that's where they have the wing today, but it was a regular home on Main Street, North Main Street, and it had been made over into a hospital. There was a surgery there, and they did surgeries. In fact, I was born there, and then I had my appendix out there when I was around 10 years old, and it was just looked like a house on the outside, but inside there was a real hospital.
You know, that's something I personally never knew, and I find fascinating. She was born in 1917, and I worked up some major events in U.S. and world history, and I'm gonna run them by everybody right now. Helen was 1 year old when Germany surrendered, ending World War I. She was 3 years old when women got to vote in this country. She was 12 years old when the stock market crashed in 1929. And I should mention she was 10 years old when Charles Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic along a solo flight and landed in Ireland. The first television broadcast was in 1939, and Helen was 22 years old at that point. She was 24 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. She was 28 when the A-bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. 33 years old when the Korean War began in 1950. She was 52 years old when Americans Armstrong and Aldrin landed on the moon. She was 74 years old when Desert Storm occurred, and she was 99 years old when Donald Trump was elected President of the United States. And also I worked up one other one. You were 25 years old when I was born, and I'm 70. I think that's great. All right, well, you actually grew up in Munson.
That's right.
And before we get into your life, which is very interesting, the ancestors of yourself and your husband who came to this country, I'll just mention a few of them here. This is fascinating stuff. You have, let's see, I made all kinds of notes. Okay. One of your ancestors came from Scotland, and what was his name?
David Bradford.
Okay, and he was a stonemason?
He was a stonemason and worked at the Flint Quarry in Munson.
Okay, now, what I understand is he was part of the crew that quarried the steps. Not only quarried the marble for the steps, but installed the steps at the Bunker Hill Monument.
That's what I understand. my mother always told me that he helped cut the stones and for the Bunker Hill Monument.
Okay. Now, another one of your ancestors came here in 1629.
That's right. That would have been my husband's.
Okay, why don't you tell that story?
Oh, well, he came over, Robert Moulton, and he had a son, I believe it was another Robert Moulton, who was in the Revolutionary War, and in 1976 they redid his monument, the Historical Society in Munson, and you'll find it at Moulton Hill Cemetery, almost on the line between Munson and Wales, but it's in Munson. When he came over, he was a carpenter, and in the book, they came into Salem, and their history book tells about him, tells where he lived in Salem, and also gives a list of the tools which he brought with him to work. He later moved, in fact, all of the Moulton's family moved west, as many of the people did who stayed for a short while on the East Coast and then began to move west. And some of them went into Connecticut, and others went even further west, but he stopped in Munson.
Okay,
Yes.
and stayed here.
And stayed there.
And we're grateful for that.
Yes.
Now, not to bring up territorial disputes, but you're aware Munson was actually carved out of Brimfield, right?
Well, I always heard that Brimfield left Munson,
Oh.
and that Munson was the original, I believe. Now, I could be wrong on that.
I think you
So,
are on that one.
You think I'm
I
wrong
do.
on that one? All right. Well, then, one way or the other, he landed in the part that was Munson, and that's why, because his name Robert Moulton, I think you'll find that Moulton Hill was named from him, from his family. Yes.
All right, another very interesting thing is that your grandfather and your father, well, let's start with your grandfather, ran the town farm and also ran the stagecoach between Munson and Palmer.
Well, no, that is correct on grandfather and yeah, my father and grandfather were overseers at the town farm in Munson. But the one who ran the stagecoach was not the same family. It was Mark Noble, and he was my grandfather.
Ah,
So you have two families there.
okay,
All right.
all right. Now, when we were talking earlier about the interview, you mentioned that you actually grew up in the town farm.
I was there until first grade, and then because I went down, I had to walk 1.5 miles to get to the little school at East Hill. And so they sent me down to live with my grandmother during the week, Monday or Sunday night through Friday. And I went to Mechanic Street School, which was right nearby, and then losing my train of thought there. Yes, and then I went back after the first year, and I started in the little school, the one-room school at the top of East Hill in Munson, and But I was just there for a short time, and then my father gave up as a overseer and came down and started a dairy farm on right in the middle of the town, 35 High Street. There was a big barn behind it and an ice house and a chicken coop and the like, and he owned all of the big fields up on Flint Park, and so that's how he ran a dairy farm, and we used to drive the cows during good weather from 35 High Street up the road to Flint Park, where he had both a large pasture as well as what the town now owns as the recreation field.
Fascinating.
All right.
All right, tell us about the town farm. Why was it set up and who
Well,
was
that
there?
was called also the Poor Farm, and it's where there were no Social Security, no Medicare at that time, so if you were poor and had no other family to care for you, why, you could live there. It was a large, large house. The big L was where the inmates, as we called them, lived. They had a large living room, and they had smaller bedrooms, separate ones, off the living room. And there they were warm, well-fed, and quite comfortable. I used to, as a child, run in to talk to them, play with them. We would do a game or something of that kind, and so I knew all of the people there. They all gathered 3 times a day in the dining room, and some of the ones that were able to would help in the kitchen in preparing meals. My mother was in charge of all of the meals and of the inmates, and my father ran the farm.
Okay, yeah, and describe the people that you remember living there, genders and ages and so forth.
I don't remember men, although there was one man that I do remember because he was crippled and had a bad foot, and it was hard for him to get around. There was a large lady, and she was a peppy person who let you know just what she was thinking and stood up for herself for whatever she needed. And she helped prepare things in the kitchen. And along with her, there was a woman who was both blind and deaf. And she was the one who did all the dishwashing. And my mother said that when she was doing the dishes, my mother would check from time to time, and never did she find anything with any kind of a spot on them. She did it all with the use of her hands and feeling each plate cup to be sure that they were absolutely clean.
That's amazing. So it was mostly women. Were there children living there as well?
No, there were no children. They were older women, and I don't remember men, but that does not mean that there were not men there. But perhaps maybe they had a separate spot for them where I was not to go. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Never remember that.
All right. Well, now, time on your father also, in addition to running the dairy farm and the poorhouse in Munson, also, did he have something to do with the stagecoach?
No, the only thing he had to do with the stagecoach was, I remember my mother telling about something like a victory parade, perhaps, after World War One, and he drove in a parade and drove the stagecoach with my mother holding me as a baby. I never saw, I've always wondered if there was a postcard or a picture of it somewhere, maybe the Historical Society had it, but I'm not sure.
Do you know what happened to that stagecoach?
That stagecoach was purchased by Mrs. Storrow from the eastern states, and it was given to Starrowtown to be used to give people rides around the exposition. However, and I have a long article telling about what detail she went to on having that all redone in great detail by a professional when she gave it to Starrowtown. Unfortunately, the manager at Starrowtown has never been able to find any record of what happened to it. I saw it once when I was visiting from New Hampshire, and I saw it and saw the name Mark Noble, Munson to Palmer on the stagecoach. But the next time I went in, it was gone, and no one knows just where.
Well, when did you get married? How old were you?
20, I believe, almost 21, and we were married the way so many people were at that time, at home. It was a home wedding with family and a few friends there.
Not hundreds of friends and your
No,
father laying out thousands of dollars?
Not
like
hundreds,
today?
no, it was just as many as could be accommodated by the size of it, and it was a large home. I'm still there.
What was the address of that home?
35 High Street.
Oh, yeah.
That was my home for many years until I was married.
Now, one interesting story that comes out of your marriage is that you had been attending the University of Massachusetts at Amherst.
Oh, yes.
Okay, why don't you tell that, and then what happened after you got married? Explain that.
All right. Well, I had just finished my junior year, and we were married in September, and I went back to have my classes and finish and graduate. Before I went back, I went to the Dean of Women, and I told her I was being married, and that would there be any change, and would I use my own name, or would I be able to use my husband's? And she said, no question, use your husband's name. And I was the first woman that had been married as a student. I don't know about men, but the first woman that was married. We lived in an apartment in the center of Amherst above Hastings Bookstore. And then this was Depression times, and we had, I think there were 5 rooms there, and we rented 2 of them, so that we had very little rent to pay after we received the rent from the other couple.
Do you remember what your rent was per month?
Yes, our rent was $35 a month, which was a good rent, but then the rooms such as we had between Amherst College and the university, or it wasn't the university then, it was Mass State College. Why, they were in great demand to have heated apartment like that. So,
Wonderful.
and then after I had graduated from college, we went back to Munson, and we lived there for 2 years, and my husband was teaching at Munson Academy, Munson High School. He graduated from the buildings of Munson Academy, but they were then called Munson High School. So he started his first year as a graduate in 1926, as a graduate of Munson Academy High School.
Okay. You had 2 children, Richard and Catherine.
Yeah, that's right. One was born, Catherine, in 1942, and Dick was born in 1944.
Okay. And one of the things that I learned when we were talking was the fact that your husband and I think a couple of other men started a Ford dealership in Munson.
It was his Ford dealership, and he kept that and successfully until someone from the Ford company came in one day and said that they were going to send him, I'm not quite sure how many, but at least 3 or 4 Ford cars, and he was buying his cars one at a time and selling them. What he did, he would go to the bank in Munson and tell them he wanted to had sold really a new car, and they sold it not necessarily by seeing the car, but by looking at pictures and the like, or if he had an example there, they would see that. But he would go down somewhere near Boston after he had borrowed money to buy the car. He would go down somewhere near Munson. He must have gone by train because he drove the car home and then delivered it to whoever had bought it. And then he was able to repay the bank. So that's how that worked out. But not only that, he had to teach the person usually how to drive, and particularly women. And he had quite a few stories to tell about teaching women to drive the early Ford cars.
And eventually Ford tried to make him buy
yes.
3.
That's what I
model? Do you
started
remember what
to-
kind or what year?
Yes, Ford came in and said, you have to take so many cars. And he said, I can't do that. I sell my cars one at a time. I don't have the wherewithal to pay you for 3 cars, as he would have had to do, and keep them on a lot when I don't know who I can sell them to. So he finally said, they said, we're going to take the agency from you. He said, you don't, and he loved to tell this, which bothered me always. And he used to say, well, you don't have to take it from me because I'm giving it to you right here and now. So he did.
So he closed the Ford agency.
And then he was offered a chance to teach at the school, and he had later Jack Colleton bought the garage and had it, and he stayed on teaching someone was going to be out for a year, and he filled their place and then went on to teach for 14 years there.
Okay. All right. So you lived in Munson, and your husband was a high school teacher in addition to this Ford
Yes.
dealership. And did you have a career yourself?
No, I did not. At that time, I was trained, I had some training for a teacher, but it was Depression time. And they did not want two people in the same family to have a job. So as a teacher, they did not hire married women. At the time my husband was hired, he was given a salary of $1,100. Now this is Depression time, and immediately before he started, they took 10% off all the teachers that were working. So he had $1,000 a year.
Yeah. That doesn't go very far.
No.
No.
Well, it went a lot further in those days,
Yeah.
when I don't know whether you picked up anything on what food cost those days, but I do know that I think it was 5 cents for a loaf of bread.
You do have some figures, but your recollection is 5 cents for a loaf of bread, huh?
That was what I was thinking. Now,
what
I
kind
could
of,
be wrong.
what was the downtown, what businesses were in the downtown area of Munson at that point?
Oh, there was a shoe store. Incidentally, Mark Noble owned almost all from the Memorial Hall up to Bradway's newsroom, that is up to Cushman Street. And he rented the places. And there was a shoe store, there was a fruit store, there was a meat market, Haley's Meat Market, I think it was. And then on the corner, and I don't know whether he owned that or not, but would seem reasonable, was Bradway's newsroom. That was one side. Then on the other side, there was Gage's store. And at one time, my father ran a delivery wagon when he was first married, and they delivered your groceries. You could call on the phone, give your order, and they would deliver them to you.
And your school, when you went from the one-room schoolhouse on East Hill Road,
Yes.
what was the event? Did you graduate from Munson schools?
Yes, I graduated from Munson High School in
Where was that located?
1934.
1934?
Yes.
And where was that located at the time?
I was in what was called the new high school, the one that was destroyed by the tornado.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah. I
And
mean,
my-
right in the downtown area, it used to serve as a town hall. Was that the high school at one point? You know, right in
I
the
don't
center?
know what they had for, they had all these one district schools with several grades in, all throughout town. There was a Molten Hill in the Munn district, and just everywhere. In fact, Mechanic Street had 4 rooms, and there was first and second grade, third and fourth, and then fifth and sixth. And before that, they had before they went from sixth grade to junior high school in what I still call the new high school, even though it's no longer there. They started junior high down there at 7th and 8th grade. And in Mechanic Street School, they would have gone to through 8th grade, In other words, 4 rooms with 2 classes to a room. And I know my husband went to Green Street School, and he went there through 9th grade. But they must have gone, everyone must have gone to Munson Academy before they built the new high school, and then it became Munson Academy and a private school. I'm not sure about that relationship there.
Okay. When you were, going back to when you were just a child, and you were taken to your grandmother's at the, to live in the poor farm, how do you remember getting there? Were you on a horse? This is, or a vehicle of some sort?
No, my
Carriage?
father had some kind of a black car, 2-seater, and I think it did have a canvas top, but I remember it as being open at the sides. And he used that.
And dirt roads, as opposed
Yes.
to asphalt.
Yes.
And do you remember some of the early, like, storms of note? For example, the 1939 hurricane. Do you remember
Oh,
that?
I remember 1939, definitely.
Describe what happened there.
Yes, that was the one where we were living right on Main Street in Munson, right near the monument. And the one thing that I remember is that we looked out the window and looked up and saw the steeple off the church and the great huge pine trees gradually bending until they had fallen.
Wow.
I remember that. I remember not being particularly emotionally involved until I walked up High Street to 35 High Street and saw a great big beautiful tree flat. And then it really hit me that in my own, where I had grown up, yes.
Do you remember very high winds, torrential rain?
Well, I remember high winds because the steeple went over. The only thing that was interesting was that it went so slowly, and the trees went slowly, but they crashed down, yes.
Was there a flooding in downtown area? Do you remember?
Oh, and the big trees all the way down the hill there from the monument on down to the center of town, they were crisscross across the road. And my husband went over to Bethany Road where an aunt was living, and they had to walk up, and he had to help carry her over some of these big trees that had fallen to get to our house where she could be safe.
About 20 years ago, you moved to Brimfield.
Yes,
And where were you living at that point?
we had spent 20 years in Prospect Harbor, Maine, right on the ocean, looking across at a lighthouse, and beautiful sunrises and sunsets. But we came back, I came back because my husband died, and we had been planning to come back to be a little bit nearer to Dick. And then I continued and sold our place up there, which had been for sale, And I came back and found this place and have lived here ever since. That was in 1996. And now it's 21 years, I guess. Yes.
You know, I remember in one of our conversations, there was mention of a shed. I believe it was in Munson at one point that was moved to Maine. Tell that story.
That's quite a story. I'm sure that everybody here has seen Holmbrook, which is the not new, the old home that was damaged by a tornado. And that this gentleman from Tolland, Jim, has completely repainted, restored. Anything that was broken has been fixed just the way it was, with the very best of materials, and as it was originally, and is now a beautiful addition to Munson. And he intends to go on and repair the carriage shed that was there. And there was also a barn where they kept one Jersey cow for the people at Holmbrook. He now I'm forgetting what you asked.
Oh, that was about, was it a shed that was on your property?
And there was, that's the thing. And also, there was a chicken coop. It was beautifully built, double-wided, matched boards, and even, and completely overlap boards on the side that were all painted to match the house at that time. And my husband, they wanted to take it down to save on taxes. So that was to be removed, and they gave it to Bob. And Bob took it apart, board by board, and then he got someone whose name escapes me, but I remember he had a big truck. And after Bob had tried to find out what it would cost to ship it on the railroad and various things like that, and a regular mover, this fellow said, "I'll take your shed up to Maine," and he did, piled it all on, and we went up with no hitches at all with the whole thing until we got to a little dip in the old road into where we were building going to build a camp, and there was mud, and we sank in the mud. And so the old fellow who had sold us that land brought his horse and wagon down, and he unloaded the truck, carried it to the spot where we were building the camp. And the camp is still there, changed a lot because there was no water and no electricity, and we now have the great-grandchildren are up there right now enjoying it, and Dick and Sandy have the camp. And just before Dick died, for about 2 years, he bought another little place where they could escape right on the water, that a friend had said he would put Dick's name first on it as first chance after they left. So Dick and Sandy had that, and that's where Dick spent his last days, very happily with his boat and doing all the things he loved to do around camp.
Wonderful.
And the grandchildren, really, there's one little story that's sort of fun. They decided that the children should go to the West Coast and at least see the Grand Canyon and things. So they planned and planned this little trip together, and then one day the kids said something about, well, when are we going to Maine? When are you going to camp? And he said, oh, well, we're going to spend the time that I have driving across the country. There won't be time this summer to go to Maine. Oh, we don't want to drive across the country, they said. We want to go to Maine.
How
So
many grandchildren do you have?
I have 6 grandchildren and 12 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
Yes.
You know, I have to say, a life well lived. You're the first person I've sat with in my life that was 100. Okay? I've never known anyone else. And I gotta tell you something. Only about 3 weeks ago or so, Bob Datz and I interviewed Sumner Bar, who was the last living resident, as far as he knows, from the village of East Brimfield,
Oh,
before they made it into a flood control lake. He came up to his interview. He's a 93-year-old man in a almost new Chevrolet Corvette, 6-speed manual shift transmission, and he's 93.
oh, that's
And I'll tell you
wonderful.
something, as sharp as the day is long, I think he amazed all of us that were with him. And you're amazing us right now. And I was rethinking the whole concept of age based on people who have lived their life well. You know, one thing I noticed between you and him, both of you have maintained a healthy weight. You are very active. You had, you know, a lot of education, both of you. You read books all the time. You're interested in everything. And that's wonderful. That probably is as healthy a life as you could possibly live. And that may be the key to the whole thing. Keeping your weight down, eating the right foods that we all know, not drinking to excess, not, you know, doing anything to excess. Make sure you exercise, as you mentioned. He mentioned that as well. But mostly it's like, have a joy of living. I think that's a wonderful prescription, you know, that people could take away from both of your interviews. Well, I think that'll do it. And is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, there's lots and lots of stories, but you can't tell them all.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this.